Hey everybody, Preston Poulter here with Pocket Jacks Comics, and today I'm talking about Sara. This was put out by relatively new comic book production company TKO with very experienced writers Garth Ennis taking the helm, and I gotta say, props to the artwork team. I'm gonna go ahead and take a pause and say I really liked Steve Epting's art. In fact, I think I might even contact him on Twitter and offer him a gig. So, good job, Mr. Epting. All right. Before we get started, I'm really close to this topic because of my own project, White Lily, which is about the deadliest female combat pilots in history who were also on the Eastern Front fighting the Germans in World War II. So I've kind of taken my own kind of writer's stance on how to portray the Eastern Front and how to portray the Soviet Armed Forces during that time. And so when I'm reading somebody else's work, I look at it from like 50,000 feet. I stand way back and look at the theme and look at like the portrayals and go, because I've been turning the story over in my mind, my own version of it, for literally years and had a whole bunch of conversations. So when I look at somebody else, it's hard for me to not just second guess and go, well, why did you do that? You should have done this. So my perspective is going to kind of be a little biased. I understand that. Bear with me. All right. One, just to talk about the topic. Eastern Front was a brutal place. It's not a happy time, and if we're taking a character from that time, I feel like it's almost an injustice to the things that were going on there to kind of put a happy face on it and just like, woo, a bunch of happy commies just like out fighting for Stalin, hooray. That's not true to the experience. They were taking very heavy casualties from the Germans, like 3-1, and they were also, this was just after Stalin had completed the purge. And if you compare how many Russians the Germans killed, it's about on par with how many Russians Stalin killed. So, Hitler believed. There was a phrase, all we have to do is kick open the rotted door and the whole house will collapse. He didn't believe that anybody would fight to defend Stalin. In fact, I was told that Stalin was having a conversation with Churchill at one of these big conferences, and Churchill asked him, like, when did you know we would win the war? And he's like, as soon as the Germans attacked. And Churchill was like, really? That early? He's like, yeah. When I learned that my people would actually fight to defend our government, I was like, oh, well, don't worry about it. At that point, it just became a matter of bodies. How many millions did you kill? I'll just throw a few more. So that was kind of Stalin's attitude about the whole thing. And it was just a brutal place and a brutal time. And, so, Sara does deal with that. It does, I feel. And in as light as possible tones. Like, he doesn't drop the hammer on the commies too hard. But he does suggest that there is some disillusionment there. There is the question of, why are we out here? What are we fighting for? That's really the hardcore driving struggle of my story, White Lily, is a quest for purpose amidst, this devastated wasteland when your own people would want you dead. Like, what are you out there fighting for? And so Sara does bring up the question. They don't really answer it because it's a tough question to answer. But, we end up in, you kind of know from the get-go, we have to end up in a sniper duel as per Enemy at the Gate. And the book delivers. Good. I'm not going to spoil the sniper duel. It's very good. I enjoyed it. I think you will like the ending. The ending is a very good representation of the genre and the setting and this kind of gritty realism and fatalism of, being Russian and Soviet on the Eastern Front during World War II. So I'm giving a high marks on the writing. Art style, that's they got a Tiger tank, I think, Mark IV. I was told by a friend of mine who studies these things, and he commented like, wow, this person, really has attention to detail, which I appreciate, in my work. I got attention to detail. Like, that is an MP-40 submachine gun she's holding, complete with a collapsible stock. She's standing next to a T-34 tank. That's an American P-39. That's a Yak-1. That's a Ju-88. Like, I want the things to look like the things. I don't want, on that famous cover where Captain America's punching out Hitler, one of those German soldiers is holding a Thompson submachine gun, which is an American gun, the Tommy gun, the Chopper. Like, how did how did the German guy get that, right? Like, come on, a level of realism, particularly in today's Google active society, is not hard to do. So I'm glad they stuck with that. They ended up making the women, in my opinion, like way too like model ready, quite frankly. Like, it looked like they could just take off their camos and put on a dress and walk down the runway and model some stuff. Complete with like nice rougey cheeks, which you could argue, well, that's from the cold, but okay, well, what about the nose, which is going to get hit the hardest? It almost looks like they're kind of wearing lipstick, and these women are supposed to be out there on like the front, walking around days at a time, and that's the one. All right, a couple of criticisms here of Sara. When you think of snipers, right, you think of people kind of being sent out away from people, and kind of living out there on their own, on the cutting edge, maybe behind enemy lines, looking for high value targets like officers, and just from like a mile away, boom, your captain's dead. That's what you think of in snipers. Sara doesn't give us too much of that. There are a fair number of combat scenes against just kind of body waves of Germans, which suggests really more what the Soviets should be doing. And if you just look at the stories, like the Germans just getting crushed, and I'm like, this was not true to the experience of the Russians on the Eastern Front, where like the kill ratio was 3-1, 3 Russian casualties for every 1 German casualty. So there was that, and there's this one situation where they're behind a trench, and here come the Germans charging, and like it seems like right out of World War I tactics. That was how kind of World War I was fought, was kind of trench warfare and maybe a charge. But when they're standing right next to a tank, the Germans that is, and like these people are just picking them off with machine guns and sniper rifles and stuff. You're like, why don't they just have the tank fire off a round? Oh, here's a thought. Why don't we have the infantry behind the tank? There's an idea, right? These were World War II tactics. In fact, the Germans revolutionized the Blitzkrieg. Before, the thought was that an army could only move as fast as someone could walk. And that included your mechanized stuff. The tanks were just seen as something that could clear the way of obstacles for your infantry to advance. The Germans were like, screw that. Send in the armor by itself. No infantry, just send in the armor. And that was the Blitzkrieg, the Lightning War, was here comes the armor with the air support, and it would just take out all of these installations, and then the infantry would come in behind it. We don't see that. The Germans are just kind of lining up and walking and just being taken out, and I'm like, gee, how come none of these Germans have a mortar? That would be really helpful when you got all these, like lady snipers there basically playing the role of infantrymen. I mean, they're not really snipers at that point. There's infantry people. And I'm like, this is not quite up to what I feel World War tactics should be. In the long run, that's probably a minor criticism. It doesn't quite have the gritty realism of, say, Enemy at the Gate, which where I'm really feeling like, the sniper walking out, spending a long time there, sitting, looking through scopes, looking for high-value targets. There's more concessions made in terms of nice action art that goes up on the screen. But other than that, I thought it was a good story. I recommend it to people who are interested in that kind of thing. I recommend White Lily first, not just because it's mine. I feel it's better. I got the Kickstarter for White Lily issue 3 coming up on May the 9th. Link down in the description, as well as a link to Sara. You can take a look at that. But other than that, thank you very much for your time. Take care.